Lieutenant Du-Jin Kim stood at attention in the gleaming hallway of the Star Seeker, trying not to show how uncomfortable he felt. The metal floor was too cold. The air was too dry. Even after 6 months on this alien ship, he still couldn't get used to it. 3 tall, blue-skinned aliens walked past him without even looking his way. Du-Jin was used to this too. To them, he was just another human, primitive, weak, and expendable. He kept his face neutral, but his hands tightened into fists at his sides. "Lieutenant Kim, report to Command Center immediately," the ship's AI announced in its flat voice. Du-Jin straightened his black uniform and walked quickly through the curved hallways. Other crew members, mostly aliens from different planets, moved aside as he passed. Not out of respect, he knew, but because they didn't want to touch a human. The command center doors slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, Commander Xith sat in the raised central chair, his 4 eyes focused on the giant screen in front of him. The commander's gray scales shimmered under the bright lights. "Lieutenant Kim," Commander Xith said without turning around, "we have received a distress signal from planet NK-427. Du-Jin knew about NK-427. Everyone did. It was the planet where survey teams went to die. Its air was thick with poison. Its jungles were full of creatures that could tear apart a battle tank. The last 3 rescue missions had never returned. The signal appears to be coming from one of our old research stations," Commander Xith continued. "You will investigate." Du-Jin's heart beat faster, but he kept his voice steady. "Alone, sir." "Of course alone." Now Commander Xith turned to look at him, all 4 eyes blinking slowly. "Our more valuable crew members cannot be risked on such a dangerous mission." The insult was clear, but Du-Jin didn't react. He had learned to be patient. "When do I leave?" "In 2 hours. Report to the launch bay for equipment and briefing." Commander Xith turned back to his screen. Dismissed. As Du-Jin walked to his small cabin to prepare, he thought about his family back in Seoul. His mother had cried when he joined the Space Force. His father had been proud but worried. Both of them had been afraid he would face discrimination among the aliens. They had been right about the discrimination, but they hadn't known how bad it would be. In his cabin, Du-Jin packed quickly. He had a photo of his parents and his sister Youngmai on his desk. He touched it briefly, then put it in his pocket. If this was going to be a suicide mission, he wanted their picture with him. The equipment they gave him in the launch bay was basic: a survival suit, 3 days of oxygen, some emergency rations, and a standard pistol. Du-Jin checked everything twice. He knew they were hoping he would fail, but he had no intention of dying on NK-427. "Good luck, human," said the alien technician preparing his drop pod. The words sounded like an insult. Du-Jin climbed into the small pod without responding. As the door sealed shut, he thought about all the times the alien crew had looked down on him, all the times they had given him the worst jobs, the most dangerous missions. The pod shuddered as it was loaded into the launch tube. Through the small window, Du-Jin could see the massive planet below. NK-427 looked like a marble made of poison-green clouds and dark continents. "Launch in 10 seconds, the ship's AI announced. Du-Jin closed his eyes and took a deep breath. They were sending him to die, but he had a secret they didn't know about. Humans were very, very hard to kill. Launch. The pod shot out into space, and Du-Jin Kim began his fall toward hell. The drop pod shook violently as it entered NK-427's atmosphere. Du-Jin gripped his harness tightly, watching as the metal walls around him turned orange from the heat. The pod's computer displayed his descent speed in bright red numbers. They were much too high. "Warning. Entry angle exceeds safety parameters," the pod's AI said calmly. Du-Jin checked his instruments. The aliens hadn't even bothered to give him a proper entry path. They really did want him to die. He reached for the manual controls, his training taking over. "Switching to manual control," he said through gritted teeth. The pod rolled sharply to the left, then to the right. Du-Jin fought with the controls, trying to stabilize his descent. The thick, greenish clouds outside his window parted. Du-Jin got his first real look at NK-427's surface. Dense jungle stretched as far as he could see, broken only by tall, sharp mountains. The trees below him looked wrong. Their leaves were deep purple instead of green. His pod's parachutes deployed with a sharp jerk. Du-Jin watched the altitude numbers carefully. The ground was coming up fast, too fast. He braced himself for impact. The pod crashed through several trees before hitting the ground. Metal screamed. Sparks flew. When everything finally stopped moving, Du-Jin hung upside down in his harness, tasting blood in his mouth. Landing successful, the pod's AI announced. "Have a nice day." Du-Jin almost laughed at that. He unbuckled his harness and fell to what was now the pod's ceiling. Everything hurt, but nothing seemed broken. He ran a quick check of his survival suit. The oxygen system was working. The poison air outside wouldn't kill him, at least not right away. He pulled up the distress signal data on his wrist computer. The source was about 10 kilometers to the north, through dense jungle, on a planet full of deadly creatures, with only 3 days of oxygen. "Perfect," Du-Jin muttered. He gathered his supplies and checked his pistol. The weapon felt too light, too weak for this place. But it was all he had. The pod's door was jammed. Du-Jin had to kick it 3 times before it burst open. Hot, humid air rushed in, even through his suit's filters. The jungle around him was eerily quiet. No bird sounds, no insects, nothing. His wrist computer beeped, analyzing the air. The results made him shake his head. The atmosphere was 30% methane, mixed with other gases that would kill him in seconds if his suit failed. Du-Jin took his first steps on NK-427. The ground felt spongy under his boots. The purple trees towered above him, their leaves blocking most of the sunlight. Strange vines hung everywhere, moving slightly even though there was no wind. He checked his compass and started walking north. Each step had to be careful. The ground wasn't stable. Twice he nearly fell into hidden holes covered by what looked like grass, but wasn't really grass at all. After an hour of walking, Du-Jin stopped to check his oxygen levels. The crash had damaged his main tank. He now had less than 2 days of air, not 3. The aliens had known this would happen. They had planned for it. "I won't die here," Du-Jin said quietly. "I won't give them the satisfaction." A loud crash came from somewhere behind him. Then another, closer. Something big was moving through the jungle, heading his way. Du-Jin drew his pistol and looked for cover. The crashes got louder, closer. The ground shook with each impact. Whatever was coming was huge. Du-Jin found a space between 2 giant tree roots and pressed himself into it. He switched off his suit's external lights and waited. The thing that emerged from the jungle was bigger than he had imagined, much bigger. Du-Jin's hand tightened on his pistol, but he knew the small weapon would be useless against this creature. All he could do was stay absolutely still and hope it hadn't noticed him. He was wrong about that too. The creature that stood before Du-Jin was the size of a small house. It had 6 powerful legs, each ending in claws as long as his arm. Its body was covered in scales that shifted color like oil on water. 2 long tails swept back and forth, knocking down smaller trees as if they were twigs. Du-Jin held his breath. His heart beat so fast, he was sure the creature could hear it. The beast turned its massive head, revealing 4 eyes that glowed with an inner light. Each eye was bigger than Du-Jin's head. The creature knew he was there. It moved forward, stepping carefully despite its enormous size. Du-Jin raised his pistol, knowing it was useless but unwilling to die without a fight. Then something strange happened. The beast's scales, which had been dark purple to match the jungle, suddenly turned pure white. All 4 eyes blinked at once. It lowered its head to the ground, now at Du-Jin's level, and made a soft rumbling sound. Du Jin kept his pistol raised, but confusion replaced his fear. He had studied the reports about NK-427's creatures. They were all described as violent, aggressive killers. This beast was acting more like a curious dog. "You're not going to eat me?" Du Jin asked quietly. The beast rumbled again. Its scales rippled with patterns of white and blue. It moved one massive paw forward and carefully pushed aside the tree roots that sheltered Du Jin, making a clear path out. Du Jin's training told him to shoot, to run, to hide. But something else, instinct maybe, or intuition, told him this was important. He stepped out from his hiding place, keeping his movements slow and calm. The beast watched him with all four eyes. Its scales shifted to match his black uniform, then back to white. Du Jin realized it was copying him, showing him what it could do. This wasn't just an animal. This creature was intelligent. "You can understand me, can't you?" Du Jin lowered his pistol slowly. The beast nodded its huge head. Actually nodded, like a human would. Then it did something even more surprising. It lay down on the ground, its 6 legs folded underneath it, and waited. Du Jin stared at the creature. It wanted him to climb on its back. The idea seemed crazy, but everything about this situation was crazy. He was already supposed to be dead. Why not take a chance? "I must be losing my mind," Du Jin said. He walked forward slowly and placed one hand on the beast's side. The scales felt warm and smooth. The beast stayed perfectly still. Using the creature's folded leg as a step, Du Jin climbed onto its back. The scales shifted to create a secure seat for him, with ridges he could hold onto. As soon as he was settled, the beast stood up. The view from up here was amazing. Du Jin could see over the tops of the purple trees. In the distance, he spotted something that looked like buildings, maybe the research station he was supposed to find. "I need to go that way," he said, pointing north. The beast turned its head to look where he was pointing, then started walking. Its movement was so smooth that Du Jin barely had to hold on. As they traveled, Du Jin's mind raced. This creature wasn't just different from the reports. It completely changed everything he thought he knew about NK-427. The aliens had been wrong about this planet, wrong about everything. "You need a name," Du Jin said to the beast. "I can't just call you creature or beast. Since your scales turned white when you first showed you were friendly, I'll call you Bake. It means white in my language." Bake's scales rippled with patterns of white and gold. Du Jin smiled inside his helmet. He had come to this planet expecting to die. Instead, he had found something extraordinary. 7 days had passed since Du Jin met Bake. His original oxygen supply would have run out by now, but Bake had shown him something amazing on their second day together. The beast had led him to a cave filled with strange, glowing plants that produced oxygen. Du Jin had managed to modify his suit to filter and use this air, solving his biggest problem. Now they sat together at the cave's entrance, watching the purple jungle in the fading light. Du Jin had learned that NK-427's days were 30 hours long, and the nights were very dark. Bake's scales glowed softly in the darkness, providing just enough light to see. "Those creatures are back," Du Jin said quietly, pointing to movement in the trees. 3 large predators prowled at the edge of the clearing. They looked like a mix between tigers and lizards, with long fangs and armored scales. Bake's scales rippled with patterns of red and black. The colors Du Jin had learned meant danger. The beast rose slowly to its feet, and all 4 eyes began to glow brighter. The predators quickly retreated into the jungle. They had learned not to challenge Bake. Du Jin smiled inside his helmet. "You're teaching me how to survive here," he said to Bake. "But I think I'm teaching you some things too." It was true. Over the past week, Du Jin had shown Bake how to set traps for the dangerous vine creatures that tried to grab them at night. He had figured out how to spot weak ground before stepping on it. And Bake now watched for these signs too. They worked well together. When they needed to cross dangerous areas, Du Jin would plan the route, and Bak would carry them safely across. When they needed to find food, for Bak, or oxygen plants, for Du Jin, Bak's keen senses would lead them to the right places. Du Jin checked his wrist computer. The research station that had sent the distress signal was still 5 kilometers away. They could have reached it sooner, but the journey was dangerous. They had to move carefully, especially after discovering the giant, snake-like creatures that lived underground. "We should rest now," Du Jin said. "We'll try to reach the station tomorrow." Bake made a low rumbling sound of agreement. The beast settled down near the cave entrance, creating a safe barrier. Du Jin sat with his back against Bak's warm side, feeling the gentle movement of the creature's breathing. He thought about the alien crew of the Star Seeker who had sent him here to die. They didn't understand. They thought humans were weak because they needed help to survive in space. But humans' real strength was in making connections, in working together with others. Bek suddenly raised its head, all 4 eyes focusing on something in the distance. Du Jin had learned to trust these warnings. He quickly gathered his equipment and climbed onto Bak's back. The ground began to shake. A huge shape burst from the purple trees, one of the underground snake creatures. It was bigger than Bike, its armored body reflecting the dim light. But Du Jin wasn't afraid. He and Bike had fought one of these before. They had learned how to handle them together. "Remember the plan," Du Jin said calmly, getting his pistol ready. Bak's scales shifted to match the colors of the cave wall. Their favorite trick. The snake creature wouldn't see them until it was too late. As the massive predator slithered closer, Du Jin smiled again. The aliens had sent him here thinking the planet would kill him. Instead, he had found something they had missed in all their studies of NK-427. The power of trust and cooperation. The research station appeared through the purple trees like a ghost. Its metal walls were covered in dark vines, and most of its windows were broken. Du Jin and Bake approached carefully, watching for any signs of danger. "This is it," Du Jin said quietly. "The source of the distress signal." He checked his wrist computer to confirm. The signal was definitely coming from inside the building. Bak's scales shifted to a deep blue color. The pattern Du Jin had learned meant caution. The beast moved forward slowly, scanning the area with all 4 eyes. Nothing moved around the station except the ever-present vines. Du Jin climbed down from Bak's back and approached the main entrance. The door was partially open, its metal frame bent by something strong. Inside, emergency lights still blinked weakly, running on backup power. "Stay close," Du Jin told Bak. The beast followed him inside, having to duck its massive head to fit through the doorway. Their strange shadows danced on the walls as they moved deeper into the facility. The first few rooms were laboratories, but they were completely destroyed. Whatever research the aliens had been doing here, they had tried to erase it quickly. Broken equipment and shattered data screens littered the floors. In the third lab, Du Jin found something interesting. A large screen on the wall still worked, showing strange diagrams and alien text. He connected his wrist computer to the system and started downloading the data. "This is odd," he muttered, reading the translated text. "These aren't normal research files. They're about genetic engineering, creating new life forms." Vake made a low rumbling sound and moved closer to the screen. The beast's scales rippled with patterns of white and gold, showing interest. Du Jin looked back and forth between the diagrams on the screen and his new friend. "Wait a minute," Du Jin said slowly. "These diagrams, they look like you, Bake, or at least an early version of you." More texts appeared on his screen as the translation continued. Du Jin's eyes widened as he read. The truth was incredible. Bake's species hadn't evolved naturally on NK-427. They had been created in this very laboratory. "You were designed to help terraform planets," Du Jin said, looking at Buck with new understanding. "That's why you're so intelligent. Why you can change your colors and adapt so quickly. You weren't meant to be just another creature. You were meant to help make this planet livable." Buck's scales showed complex patterns of blue, white, and gold. The beast seemed to understand what Du Jin was saying. It moved to another screen and carefully touched it with one claw. The screen came to life, showing more data. "The project was abandoned," Du Jin read from the new files. "They thought it failed because they couldn't control your species. They didn't understand that you weren't meant to be controlled. You were meant to be partners." A loud crash from somewhere deeper in the facility interrupted them. Both Du Jin and Bake turned toward the sound. Something else was in here with them. "Download complete," Du Jin's wrist computer announced. He now had proof of what the aliens had done here. Proof that they had been wrong about everything. But first, they needed to survive whatever was coming their way. Buck's scales shifted to their danger pattern, red and black. The beast moved to stand between Du Jin and the source of the sound. Together, they waited in the dim light as heavy footsteps approached their position. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the dark hallways of the research station. Du Jin and Bake prepared themselves for another fight. But when the source of the noise finally appeared, they both relaxed slightly. It was another creature like Buck, though smaller and injured. Its scales flickered weakly between colors, and it limped on one of its 6 legs. When it saw Buck, the creature made a soft, rumbling sound and lay down in a gesture of respect. "It must have been trapped here when the station was abandoned," Du Jin said quietly. He approached the injured creature slowly, letting it see he meant no harm. "The distress signal, it came from you, didn't it?" The creature's scales turned a pale blue color. Du Jin recognized the pattern from Buck. It meant agreement. He examined the creature's injured leg and found it was caught in some kind of metal trap, probably left by the fleeing researchers. "Let me help," Du Jin said. He worked carefully to release the trap while Buck kept watch. The injured creature stayed perfectly still, watching him with intelligent eyes. When the trap finally opened, the creature stood up slowly, testing its leg. Du Jin turned his attention to the station's communication system. Most of it was destroyed, but he could see parts that might still work. He had an idea. "I can combine my suit's transmitter with the station's power system," he explained to Buck. "It should be strong enough to reach the Star Seeker." He started working, connecting wires and rerouting power. The injured creature moved closer, watching him work with interest. Its scales now showed patterns of gold and white. Curiosity, just like Buck. Du Jin smiled inside his helmet. These beings were so much more than the aliens had thought. After 2 hours of work, Du Jin was ready to transmit. He had prepared 2 messages. The first was a simple distress call that would bring the Star Seeker to his location. The second contained all the data he had downloaded about the true nature of Buck's species. "Here goes nothing," Du Jin said, and activated the transmitter. The machine hummed to life, sending his messages into space. Now they just had to wait. 6 hours later, his wrist computer beeped. A response from the Star Seeker. "Message received. Retrieval team dispatched. Maintain position." Du Jin looked at Buck and the injured creature. "They're coming," he said. "But I'm not leaving without you. Either of you." Both creatures' scales rippled with patterns of white and gold. Trust and friendship. They moved outside to wait. Du Jin could already imagine Commander Xith's reaction when he saw Bake. The Alien Council had sent him here to die, but he was coming back with proof that their entire understanding of NK-427 was wrong. The sound of engines filled the air. A shuttle from the Star Seeker descended through the purple trees, landing in the clearing near the station. The door opened, and 4 armed alien guards stepped out, followed by a medical team. They all froze when they saw Buck and the other creature. The guards raised their weapons, but Du Jin stepped forward, standing between them and his friends. "Lower your weapons," he said firmly. "There's something the Council needs to know about this planet. about these beings, and about how wrong you've all been. The main cargo bay of the Star Seeker was the only space large enough to hold Bake and the other creature, which Du Jin had named Seal because of its silver-colored scales. Commander Sith stood before them, all four of his eyes narrowed with anger and fear. "This is unacceptable," Commander Sith said. "These creatures are dangerous predators. They must be contained immediately." He gestured to a team of scientists who waited nearby with restraints and sedation equipment. Du Jin stepped forward. "No, you don't understand what they are, what they were created to be." He held up his wrist computer, displaying the data he had found. "Your own people created them as terraforming partners, not as weapons or test subjects." The commander's scales darkened with anger. That project was a failure. The creatures were too intelligent, too independent. They could not be controlled. That was the point, Du Jin said firmly. They were meant to think for themselves, to help make NK-427 livable. But your scientists couldn't accept working with beings they saw as inferior, just like you can't accept working with humans. Bake moved forward slowly, its scales shifting to display complex patterns of blue and gold. The alien scientists backed away, but one of them gasped in surprise. "Those color patterns," the scientist said, "they're communicating, using the exact language we programmed into their genetic code." She stepped closer, studying Bak with growing excitement. "This is extraordinary. They've developed far beyond our original designs." Commander Sith raised his hand to signal the security team. "Enough. Sedate the creatures and prepare them for study. Lieutenant Kim, you are confined to quarters until further notice." "No." Du Jin's voice was quiet but firm. He placed his hand on Bak's side. "If you try to cage them, you'll have to go through me first." Bak's scales rippled with patterns of red and black, the danger warning. Seal moved to flank them, both creatures positioning themselves protectively around Du Jin. The security team hesitated, their weapons lowered. The female scientist stepped between them and Commander Sith. "Sir, with respect, Lieutenant Kim is right. Look at their behavior. The protective instincts, the complex communication, the clear intelligence. This isn't just animal behavior. This is advanced social cognition." Other crew members had gathered to watch. Du Jin saw them whispering among themselves, pointing at how Bake and Seal positioned themselves, how they communicated with their color patterns. "They saved my life," Du Jin said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "Not because they were programmed to, but because they chose to. They understand friendship, loyalty, and cooperation, things you thought humans were weak for valuing." Commander Sith looked around the cargo bay. He could see he was losing control of the situation. More scientists were moving forward, eager to study the creature's behavior. The security team looked uncertain. "These beings aren't meant to be caged or controlled," Du Jin continued. "They're meant to be partners, just like humans. We're different from you, yes, but different doesn't mean inferior." Bake rumbled softly and touched its nose to Du Jin's shoulder. The gesture was so gentle, so careful, that several crew members murmured in surprise. Even Commander Sith's hostile stance wavered. 3 months after the confrontation in the cargo bay, Du Jin stood at a new observation post on NK-427. The view had changed dramatically. Where there had once been only purple trees, now patches of green vegetation grew. The air was slowly becoming less toxic, thanks to the work of Bak, Seal, and the others of their kind. The Alien Council had been forced to accept the truth about NK-427 and its extraordinary inhabitants. They had appointed Du Jin as the official liaison between the Confederation and what they now called the Nexus species. It was a position he had earned through trust, not force. Lieutenant Kim, a young alien scientist, called from the doorway. "The latest atmospheric readings are ready for your review." Du Jin nodded and turned from the window. The scientist no longer showed any fear when Bake followed Du Jin into the research room. In fact, many of the staff had formed their own bonds with the creatures, learning to understand their color-based language and intelligent behaviors. The methane levels have dropped another 2%, the scientist reported excitedly. The Nexus species are adapting the planet's atmosphere faster than we ever thought possible. They're not just surviving here. They're transforming NK-427 into something new. Through the large windows, Du Jin could see several of the creatures working together to clear a poisoned area of land. Their scales shifted in complex patterns as they communicated with each other, sharing information and coordinating their efforts. They were never meant to be controlled, Du Jin said quietly. They were meant to be understood. Commander Sith entered the room, looking uncomfortable but determined. The commander had changed over the past months, forced to confront his own prejudices. The Council has reviewed your latest report, Lieutenant, he said. They have approved your recommendation to establish a permanent human presence on NK-427. Du Jin smiled. The first human colonists will arrive next month. They'll work alongside the Nexus species to build something new here, something better. Beck's scales rippled with patterns of white and gold, happiness and friendship. The creature had grown even larger over the past months, but its gentle nature remained unchanged. It lowered its massive head to gently bump Du Jin's shoulder, a gesture that had become familiar between them. A group of younger Nexus creatures played outside, their scales flashing with bright colors as they learned to control their abilities. They were the future of NK-427, born free and unafraid. Du Jin watched them with pride, remembering how far they had all come. You know, the commander said slowly, when we sent you here, we thought we were sending you to your death. We were wrong about many things. The strongest bonds are formed when we stop trying to control each other, Du Jin replied. When we learn to work together instead. Outside, the purple sun was setting, casting long shadows across the transformed landscape. In the distance, more patches of green were spreading, a sign of the planet's ongoing change. NK-427 was no longer a place of death. It had become a symbol of what was possible when different species learned to trust and understand each other. Du Jin placed his hand on Beck's warm scales, feeling the gentle pulse of life beneath them. The aliens had sent him here to die, but instead, he had found something far more valuable than survival. He had found a way to bridge the gap between worlds, to show that true strength lay not in domination, but in cooperation. The once deadly planet was becoming a home, and its story was just beginning.